Chapter 1. The House I Was Asked to Leave. For years, my family acted like I no longer existed. I was quietly pushed out of my own home so my brother could take over, and I didn't fight it. I stayed silent. Then one day, more than a decade later, my mother called and asked me to come back, not to apologize, not to explain, but because the bank needed my signature. That's when I realized something they never expected. I may have been erased from the family, but I was never erased from the paperwork. My name is Marissa, and this is the story of how silence, patience, and the law changed everything. I was sitting alone in my office when the envelope stopped being part of the background. It had arrived earlier that morning, and I had placed it neatly at the corner of my desk, telling myself I would open it later, after I finished reviewing a client contract. But the longer it sat there, the louder it felt. The logo in the corner belonged to a regional bank I had not dealt with in years, and seeing it again stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. Outside the window, Madison moved at its usual pace. Cars rolled past, people walked dogs. Life continued without noticing me at all. Inside, everything felt paused. I was 45 years old, a legal compliance consultant for small businesses, and I had built this quiet office from nothing. I chose neutral colors, minimal furniture, and silence that I could control. Calm had become my version of safety. Still, that envelope pulled me backward before I even touched it. My name is Marissa Cole. I work alone by design. I help small companies stay out of trouble by reading what they sign and asking questions other people avoid. I have no receptionist, no staff, no framed diplomas on the wall, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and the kind of order that comes from learning what chaos costs. I live in a rented townhouse a few miles from here. Clean, predictable, empty of other people. Not lonely, just contained. Containment is something I learned the hard way. As I stared at the envelope, my thoughts slid back to the year that fractured my sense of belonging. 2013. I was 32 years old and newly unemployed, another casualty of a corporate restructuring that promised efficiency and delivered uncertainty. One email, one meeting, one cardboard box. By the end of the week, my job was gone. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was capable. Still, when my lease came up, I made the decision to drive back to my parents' house outside Madison, just for a little while. A few months to reset, to save money, to breathe. The house had been purchased in 2001 for $180,000, back when my parents believed in growth and permanence. It sat on a quiet street with trimmed lawns and neighbors who waved politely but never asked questions. My father, Daniel Cole, was 61 then. He ran a regional logistics company that had supported us comfortably for years, though it had begun to slow as larger competitors moved in. My mother, Elaine Cole, was 58 and managed the household finances with an iron calm she called responsibility. I called it control. My younger brother, Ryan, was 27, recently engaged to his longtime girlfriend, Heather, and treated as if his future required constant protection. He had plans. Everyone made sure those plans stayed intact. When I arrived with my car full of boxes, no one said, "Welcome home." My mother said, "You can use the guest room for now." The words sounded generous, but the emphasis was clear: for now. A week later, my parents asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. The table was spotless, which meant this was not a casual conversation. My father cleared his throat and explained that Ryan and Heather were planning to refinance the house after the wedding. Interest rates were favorable, it would help everyone, he said. My mother nodded and added that young couples needed stability to start their lives properly. Then she slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a document titled Occupancy and Liability Waiver. It stated that I would not be residing in the home and that I would not be responsible for any incidents related to the property during the refinance process. They told me it was standard, insurance-related, just something the bank required to make the paperwork easier. I asked what easier meant. My father said lenders like clarity. My mother said it did not affect ownership. My brother stared at the grain of the wood table. I asked how long this arrangement would last. My mother said until Ryan and Heather were settled. I asked what would happen if I needed to come back. She said we would figure that out later. I asked whether the document affected my long-term rights in any way. My father said no. My mother said it was just a formality. The answers were smooth but incomplete. Each one deflected instead of clarified. I asked Ryan what he thought. He shrugged and said it made sense. He said it would be easier for everyone. He did not look at me when he spoke. The papers were already prepared, signature lines highlighted, a pen placed carefully beside the folder, waiting. It was clear this conversation was not an invitation. It was a process already in motion. At that moment, I had no income. My savings were shrinking. I was staying in the house as a favor, not as a right. The message was quiet but firm. This was no longer my place. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. She told me I was the responsible one, the flexible one. She said sacrifice was part of being a family. I read the document twice. It did not transfer ownership. It did not mention inheritance. It did exactly what they said it did. But something about the timing felt wrong. I hesitated, then signed. It took less than a minute. That afternoon, I packed my clothes into a single suitcase. I told myself I would stay with a friend until I found work. My father carried the suitcase to my car. He hugged me briefly, the way you hug someone who is leaving but not expected to return soon. My mother waved from the doorway. Ryan stood behind her, silent. As I drove away, I did not feel anger. I felt erased, not expelled, just edited out of the picture so the remaining pieces could fit more neatly together. Years later, people would ask why I left without arguing. The truth is, there was nothing dramatic to argue against. There were only reasonable requests, each small enough to accept on its own, until together they formed absence. Back in my office in 2024, the envelope still waited. I placed my hand on it and felt the familiar weight of paper and consequence. Whatever was inside had roots in that kitchen, that pen, that moment I agreed to be temporarily invisible. I did not open it yet. I let the memory settle completely before allowing the present to speak. Chapter 2: Silence as a Survival Skill. The months after I left my parents' house did not arrive with drama. They arrived quietly, one after another, each day folding into the next until time felt thinner than it should have. I moved through borrowed spaces, first sleeping on a friend's couch, then renting a short-term apartment on the outskirts of Madison. The place smelled faintly of old paint and reheated food. At night, I could hear the radiator knock and the neighbors argue through the walls. I kept telling myself this was temporary. I kept telling myself I was fine. Work came in pieces, a few weeks helping a local attorney sort client files, a short contract reviewing vendor agreements for a startup that shut down before paying everyone on time. I said yes to anything that paid, even if it paid late. I tracked every dollar, every expense, pretending that control was the same thing as stability. I was not angry. Anger would have required energy I did not have. What I felt instead was a low, constant awareness that I no longer had a place to return to. I called my mother every Sunday at first. It felt like an obligation more than a desire, a way to remain visible without demanding anything. She always answered quickly, usually while multitasking. I could hear dishes clinking or papers shuffling in the background. She would ask how I was, then move on before I finished answering. She talked about Ryan and Heather, about wedding plans and seating charts, about how expensive venues had become. She talked about my father's business and how the refinance would help with cash flow. She said families had to pull together during transitions. When I tried to talk about my job search, her responses grew vague. She said I was capable, she said things would work out, then she returned to Ryan, to his stress, his future, his responsibilities. I became a listener instead of a participant. Once, I asked if the house felt different without me there. There was a pause, long enough that I noticed it. Then she said, not really. She said it was good for Ryan and Heather to have space. She said change was part of life. I stopped asking questions after that. By the end of that first year, I recognized the pattern clearly. I was included only when my inclusion required nothing. I was informed of decisions, never consulted about them. I existed on the edge of the family narrative, close enough to acknowledge, far enough to exclude without guilt. In the spring of 2014, I learned about the wedding by accident. A woman who lived down the street from my parents stopped me in the grocery store. She smiled warmly and congratulated me. She said Ryan's wedding had been beautiful. She said the whole family looked so happy in the photos. I smiled back because that was easier than asking questions in a cereal aisle. That evening, I called my mother. She sounded surprised to hear from me. I asked when the wedding had been. She hesitated, then said last weekend. She said they had decided not to invite me to avoid awkwardness. She said it was better for everyone. I asked awkward for whom? She said weddings brought out emotions and they did not want tension. She said I would understand. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. There was no sharp pain, no tears, just a quiet certainty settling into place. I was acceptable only when my absence made things smoother. That realization changed the way I moved through the world. I did not call the next Sunday, or the one after that. Weeks passed, then months. No one reached out to ask why. The silence went both ways, but it did not weigh the same. For them, it was convenience. For me, it was protection. During that period, my thoughts kept circling back to the document I had signed, not obsessively, but persistently. I remembered how quickly I had been reassured, how easily my questions had been deflected, how fast the conversation had ended once my signature was on the page. I realized I had trusted tone instead of substance. I decided I would not do that again. In the fall of 2013, I enrolled in a part-time law program at a state university nearby. Nights and weekends, tuition paid in careful installments. I did not tell my family. I did not announce it as a fresh start. It was simply a decision to understand the rules that governed the things people liked to dismiss as formalities. The first year was brutal. I worked during the day and studied at night, memorizing statutes while eating reheated leftovers. I learned how contracts were built, how liability shifted, how silence could be interpreted as agreement. Nothing about it felt empowering in a cinematic way. It felt slow and humbling and necessary. The only person who knew everything was Sarah Whitman. We had been friends since college, bonded by proximity and a shared instinct to leave situations that asked too much. Sarah had walked away from her own family years earlier for reasons she never fully explained. We met for coffee every few weeks at the same diner, sitting in the same cracked vinyl booth. When I told her about the wedding, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, some families decide who belongs based on who causes the least friction. When I told her about law school, she smiled and said knowledge was insulation. She did not call me brave. She did not tell me it would all be worth it. She told me it would take time. Progress came quietly. By 2017, I finished my program. There was no celebration. I updated my resume and kept working. I focused on compliance and contracts for small businesses, the kind that couldn't afford mistakes. I explained risk in plain language. I became someone people called before problems grew teeth. Money stabilized, then it grew slowly. I rented a better apartment. I bought furniture that fit the space instead of filling it. I created routines that did not depend on anyone else's approval. There was no moment when I felt victorious. There was just the steady accumulation of competence. I learned how to read conversations for what they avoided. I learned how to ask questions that made people pause. I learned how often decisions were made without the people most affected by them. By 2019, I registered my own consulting practice. It was small and quiet and entirely mine. I chose clients carefully. I kept my overhead low. I liked knowing exactly where my responsibilities began and ended. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if my family noticed my absence, if my mother ever reached for the phone and stopped, if my father thought about the way things had unfolded. Those thoughts passed quickly. Speculation did not change reality. By 2020, my life had a shape that felt sustainable. I worked, I rested, I met Sarah for coffee, I went home. There were no family events circled on my calendar, no expectations to perform belonging. I was not included, but I was no longer waiting. Silence had become a skill, not a punishment, not a protest, a form of survival I had learned carefully. I did not know then that the quiet I built would eventually be interrupted. I only knew that I had learned how to stand inside it without disappearing. Chapter 3. The Call I Didn't Expect. Clarity stayed with me after that realization, not as comfort, but as structure. It shaped the way I moved through my days until the afternoon and early spring of 2024, when my phone rang while I was reviewing a client compliance file. I nearly let it go to voicemail. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code tugged at something old. I stepped into the hallway and answered. There was a brief silence before my mother spoke. "I need to talk to you." Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered, careful and restrained, as if she were afraid that too much emotion might crack it. There was no greeting, no apology, just urgency. "What is it?" I asked. "It would be better if you came by," she said. "It is important." I asked if something had happened. She hesitated, then said everything was fine, but that they needed my help. That word landed softly and heavily at the same time. Help. I told her I would come the next day. Driving back toward my parents' neighborhood felt different than it used to. The route was familiar, but my body reacted as if I were entering a place I no longer belonged. I noticed details I had once ignored. New paint on a mailbox, a for sale sign 2 houses down, the absence of anything that felt like welcome. The house looked unchanged from the outside. Same pale siding, same oak tree in the front yard. When I rang the bell, my father opened the door. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. Not dramatically, but enough to register. His shoulders were rounded, his expression tired. "You came," he said. "I said I would," I replied. Inside, the furniture was arranged exactly as it always had been, but the air felt tense. My mother sat at the dining table with her hands folded. My brother sat across from her, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. His wife sat beside him, quiet, watching me carefully. My mother began speaking almost immediately. She said they were dealing with a difficult situation. She said things had not gone according to plan. She said the market had been unpredictable over the past few years. My father added that some investments had failed. He said timing had worked against them. He said they were facing pressure from the bank. I waited. My brother finally leaned forward and rubbed his hands together. He said the real estate projects he had pursued between 2021 and 2023 had collapsed. Interest rates had risen faster than expected. Tenants had defaulted. Renovation costs had exceeded projections. He said he had refinanced the house more than once to stay afloat. My mother slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were bank statements, notices stamped with urgent language, and a letter with bold print at the top. She said the total outstanding debt was around $420,000. She said the bank was preparing to move forward with foreclosure proceedings. She mentioned a name, Daniel Price, asset recovery. I knew the type, thorough, unsentimental. My father cleared his throat and said the bank required my signature to proceed with either a loan modification or a short sale. He said it was procedural, a technical detail. "Why would they need my signature?" I asked. The room went quiet. My mother spoke slowly. She said when the house was purchased back in 2001, my name had been listed as an initial co-signer on the mortgage. She said it had been easier that way at the time. She said no one thought it would matter years later. I felt something settle into place. So I was never fully removed, I said. My father looked down at his hands. My mother said they assumed I would not want to be involved. She said they thought it would be simpler not to complicate things. Did you know this all along? I asked. My brother answered instead. He said yes. He said they knew. He said they did not expect the situation to deteriorate this far. That was when it became clear. I had not been erased from the legal structure. I had been excluded from the family narrative. I was still attached when responsibility was required, invisible when decisions were made. My mother leaned forward, her voice softer now. "We need your help," she said. "We would not ask if there were another way." "What exactly are you asking me to sign?" I asked. My father said the bank needed my consent to move forward. Without it, the process would stall. Delays would increase penalties and interest. "Does signing make me financially responsible?" I asked. "No," my mother said quickly. "No," my father echoed. My brother said their lawyer assured them it was safe. I looked at each of them. I asked why they had not been honest with me about my status years ago. My mother said they didn't think it was necessary. She said they believed I would never come back. She said she thought it was better not to reopen old wounds. That sentence stayed with me. My brother shifted in his chair. He said this was not the time to revisit the past. He said they needed solutions, not blame. He said everyone had to do their part. "What is your part?" I asked. He bristled. He said he had done everything he could. He said the market had changed. He said no one could have predicted this. His wife finally spoke. She said it felt unfair to bring me back into the situation, but that family had to stick together. She said this was not about old issues. I listened without interrupting. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. I am not saying no, but I am not saying yes today. My mother looked alarmed. My father frowned. My brother shook his head. "We do not have time to wait," my father said. "I need to review the documents. I need to understand exactly what you were asking me to agree to." My mother reached across the table and said they trusted me. She said I had always been careful. "Trust is not a substitute for clarity," I said, pulling my hand back. No one argued with me. No one apologized either. I gathered the papers and stood. My father asked when I would get back to them. I said after I spoke with my own counsel. As I reached the door, my brother said this was not how family handled things. I turned and looked at him. "This is exactly how we handle things. You decide without me, then ask for my signature." Outside, the air felt lighter. I sat in my car for a moment, the folder resting on the passenger seat. I was not angry. I was not afraid. For the first time in years, I understood my position clearly. I drove away knowing I was no longer invisible. Chapter 4. When Truth is Quieter Than an Argument. Enough carried me into the next morning with a steadiness I had not felt in years. I woke early, made coffee, and laid the folder out on my kitchen table as if it were a map. Every page inside it represented a decision made without me, a risk taken in my name, a silence assumed to mean consent. I did not feel angry as I gathered the papers into my bag. I felt precise. Karen Nuller answered my call before the second ring. "I was wondering when you would reach out," she said. "I need a clean read on everything," I told her. "No family translation." "Come in," she said. "Bring everything." Her office sat above a print shop downtown, the kind of place that still smelled like ink and warm paper. Karen had been my professor during my last year of law school, and later the attorney I trusted when something needed to be done correctly. She did not waste time on comfort. I spread the documents across her desk and started from the beginning. The house purchase in 2001, my name listed as an initial co-signer, the refinance cycles, the conversation at my parents' dining table. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving only to underline dates and initials. When I finished, she leaned back and looked at me. "You are not legally obligated to save this house," she said. I nodded. Hearing it out loud mattered more than I expected. However, she continued, your signature is leverage. They cannot move forward with a loan modification or a sale without you. That puts you in a position of choice. She walked me through each document slowly, the difference between being on a deed and being on a loan, the way liability lingers when it is never formally released, the assumptions families make when they think trust replaces clarity. Halfway through the stack, she paused and tapped one page. This refinance from 2022, she said, this signature is inconsistent. I leaned forward. Inconsistent how? It may not have been authorized, she said. The bank will notice. I felt the room shift. Karen did not dramatize it. She did not need to. The implication was clear. The pressure my brother was under was about to increase. By the time I left her office, my phone had already buzzed twice. My mother called first. Have you spoken to anyone yet? She asked. I am reviewing everything, I said. They are calling non-stop, she said. We cannot delay. I will let you know, I replied. An hour later, my brother texted. This is not the time to make things difficult. I did not respond. That evening, his wife posted something online about people who abandon family and return only when money was involved. Friends commented with sympathy and agreement. I closed the app without reading further. The calls escalated over the next few days. My father tried reason. We raised you to be fair, he said. This affects all of us. My brother tried intimidation. If you do not sign, I will take legal action, he said in a voicemail. You cannot just walk away. I forwarded the message to Karen. She called me immediately. He has no grounds, she said, but he is scared. On the fourth day, my mother called again. Her voice sounded different this time, lower, unsteady. I should not have handled things the way I did. I am sorry. The words landed carefully, not an apology for 2013, for the years of exclusion, an apology for the crisis at hand. I am sorry we are in this position, she added. I let the silence stretch. I hear you, I said. That night, I returned to Karen's office. We drafted a proposal together. It was clear and restrained. I would sign the documents required to allow the bank to proceed. In exchange, my role would be defined and protected. My brother would assume full financial responsibility going forward. No future obligations would attach to me without written consent. This is not punishment, Karen said. This is structure. The next afternoon, I met my family at the house. The same dining table, the same chairs. Nothing else felt familiar. I placed the proposal in front of them. This is what I am willing to do, I said. My brother read the first page and scoffed. This is excessive, he said. You are acting like a stranger. I have been treated like one, I replied. My father frowned. This feels transactional. It is legal clarity, something we should have had years ago. My brother pushed his chair back. You are enjoying this, he said. I am not, I said calmly. I am protecting myself. My mother looked between us, her hands folded tightly. We don't have another option, my father said quietly. The room went still. My brother exhaled sharply and looked away. His wife said nothing. My mother nodded once. Do it, she said. We cannot lose the house. 2 days later, we sat with the documents laid out neatly. The bank representative joined by phone. The signatures were completed without ceremony. I watched the ink dry and felt no triumph, no relief, just alignment. When it was finished, I gathered my bag and stood. Thank you, my mother said softly. I nodded and walked out. In my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The quiet felt different now, not defensive, not fragile, just honest. Truth had done its work without needing to argue, and that was enough to carry me forward. Chapter 5. I didn't take revenge. I took my name back. What followed was not revenge in any form people would recognize from stories. There were no raised voices, no public reckoning, no moment where anyone fell apart. What changed instead was the weight distribution inside the family, and once it shifted, it never returned to its old shape. The house remained in my parents' names. The lawn stayed trimmed. The mailbox kept filling with ordinary mail. From the outside, nothing looked different, but inside the family, the center of gravity had moved. Responsibility no longer floated, it landed. Ryan stopped calling almost immediately, not out of spite and not entirely out of shame. He was busy now in a way he had never been before. The bank called him directly. The notices arrived with his name centered on the page. The conversations he used to deflect with phrases like temporary setback or market conditions now required answers. I could hear it in his voice the one time we spoke afterward. Shorter sentences, fewer explanations, numbers instead of excuses. My parents adjusted quietly. My mother no longer spoke about fixing things quickly. My father no longer framed problems as something we would figure out together. When they called, it was to update me, not to persuade me. No one assumed my agreement anymore. That was the clearest change of all. A little over a week after the paperwork was finalized, my father called and asked if I would come by. Just to visit, he said. No documents, no discussion about the bank. I paused before answering, then said yes. The house felt neutral when I walked in, like a place that no longer expected anything from me. My mother offered coffee. Ryan was not there. We sat at the kitchen table where so many decisions had been made without me, and for the first time, no one was positioning anything in advance. My father stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. I thought I was protecting the family, he said. I chose the child who stayed because it felt safer. He did not dress it up. He did not soften it. He said it plainly. I was afraid of change, he continued, and I believed you would be fine. The words settled into the space between us. They were not an apology. They were something closer to accuracy. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger, but with recognition. My mother spoke next. I wanted peace, she said. I told myself it was the same as fairness. She did not cry. She did not reach for my hand. She did not ask me to understand. She simply named the choice she had made. In that moment, I realized something I had not understood before. Closure does not always come with repair. Sometimes it comes with clarity so complete that there is nothing left to argue with. We talked for another hour about neutral things: the neighborhood, a neighbor who had moved away, a restaurant that had closed. No one asked me to stay for dinner. No one promised things would be different. And somehow, that honesty felt like relief. When I left, it did not feel like walking away. It felt like finishing a sentence that had been running on for years. Weeks later, I returned one last time to collect a box of things I had left behind: old notebooks, a winter coat, a framed photo I did not remember setting down. I carried the box to my car myself. My mother stood in the doorway. "You did not take revenge," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I took my name back." She nodded. There was nothing else to add. Driving away, I noticed how little I carried with me. No resentment, no victory, just completion. Karma did not arrive as punishment. No one was destroyed. No one was publicly exposed. The consequences were measured and private. Ryan learned what responsibility feels like when it is not shared. My parents learned what it costs to trade fairness for comfort. And I learned what happens when you stop holding yourself together for other people. Back in the life I had built piece by piece, everything fit again. My office felt right. My routines felt intentional. I did my work well and went home at a reasonable hour. I met Sarah for coffee and told her it was finished. She said, "That sounds like relief." I told her, It is alignment. In the quiet evenings, I thought about how often women are taught to disappear to preserve harmony, how often silence is misread as weakness, how often clarity is postponed because it makes other people uncomfortable. I never raised my voice. I never threatened anyone. I did not destroy anything. I read the documents. I asked the questions. I drew the boundary. That was enough. If you are listening to this and recognize yourself in it, know this: protecting yourself is not betrayal. Understanding what you sign is not selfish. Stepping back when your presence is treated as optional is not abandonment. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop smoothing the surface so others do not have to face the cracks. If this story stayed with you, if you have lived a quieter version of loss or learned strength without spectacle, you are not alone. You are welcome to share your experience or simply stay and listen. This space exists for stories that do not need rage to be powerful. I did not take revenge. I took my name back, and that was enough.